Hey everybody, my name is Brian Doak, and I've been a college professor for the past decade, and I will tell you this. One of the great joys of teaching is reading a student paper or exam answer or assignment answer, some piece of student writing, and discovering some insight, some turn of phrase, some thought that you just connect with, and you're like, yes, they get it, they were listening, this is working. However, in the last few months, something has come and infected that great feeling of joy many of us have had when we teach, and that is called ChatGPT. These AI language models, which have allowed students to essentially generate for free 24 hours a day and with great creativity, huge tracts of writing that are uniquely produced just for them in response to questions and queries to the AI model and are not really traceable or searchable as such online, and therefore we begin to get confused, those of us who teach, about whether the writing we're seeing is actually from our students or not. In this video, I want to suggest a couple of really common sense practical ways that as instructors we can think about this problem and ways we can fight against it, work with students, and try to achieve a better outcome. And I think the stuff I'm talking about here applies to high school teachers as well as college professors, so that's the intended audience here. But people teaching in a wide variety of contexts presumably could benefit from thinking about this. So the key problem here right off the bat, as I said, is that this material that students get from these AI models like ChatGPT or Bard or Claude or any other number of these that have popped up is customizable and more or less unique to that student's search. I don't know if they're always completely unique, like if sometimes you'll see repeated phraseology and so on in response to particular queries, but it's hard to go back and find it. Back in the old days of cheating, it used to be that if a student copied and pasted something off of, say, Wikipedia, if it was flagged or if you were suspicious or whatever, you could always just Google and search for those phrases, those sentences, and they would often pop back up in an internet search engine. You can't do that with these AI tools, though. And that's what makes this problem so frustrating, which raises a first point I want to make. And this has come up a lot recently, and this is something that's very important to know. You cannot use the so-called AI detection tools as infallible, as error-proof, for checking whether students have used AI language tools. Why? Because we now know that they have a high error rate of something even as high as 15 or 20%. So they will give you false positives saying, yes, the student used the AI when you enter it in the detection tool, whether this is, there are various kinds of these detection tools. We'll put these down in the show notes along with some other resources, and so you can see the kind of things that we're talking about. So you can't use that then as a 100% definitive basis to accuse a student of cheating. It doesn't work. You could try it, but the problem is if you also do a little Google search on student lawsuits based on AI detection tools, you'll find that students have now sued professors and universities, probably even high schools as well, for making these kinds of accusations based on the tools when we know in fact they have a high false positive rate. So this is our first major hurdle right away. Aren't there detection tools for this? Don't we have a solution for this? Kinda, but actually not. So the question becomes, if you can't use that as a definitive, legal or quasi-legal basis for making an accusation that a student has used one of these, how are you supposed to find out what you're looking at? When we face this problem, many of us can gravitate toward one of two extremes. Not all of us will be extreme, but I'm definitely an extreme person, so I'll go toward the extremes. Extreme number one is to say, what are you talking about? AI, writing detection tools? This isn't happening. I'm not watching. I'm not listening. I'm not looking. I'm just not going to think about that. It's just, not happening. The problem with this extreme, of course, is that it is happening, and early reports are showing us that hugely high percentages of students are using these and turning in AI-generated work as their own. So unless you're willing to say, I guess, for your classroom that you're no longer guarding the integrity of your assignments and the grades you're giving and the accreditation behind your school at whatever level, I think you can't go in for this extreme. I think you have to pay attention. I've known instructors in the past who have said things like this, like, yeah, you can't catch everything, so that's on them. That's their problem, not my problem. I guess I don't understand that as a professor, as a teacher. It is your problem. It is my problem. And it's the student's problem too. And we can't just look away. So I'm not happy about that extreme. The other extreme, and this is the one I tend to gravitate toward more, is like total paranoia. Everyone is cheating all of the time, and you're just like overly zealous about it. And I've struggled with this in many cases, even for years, worried about problems, even before this AI stuff started. The problem here, of course, is that it's not true. Not everyone is cheating all the time. It can be a significant problem, but it's not like so pervasive. It's often not personal. And I think one problem I got into when searching for cheating and writing assignments was that I was always worried that it was personal. Like I took my teaching so personally that for a student to do that, I felt like it was like a lie to me personally at the deepest depth. And, it seemed only to be like just this totally mischievous thing for its own sake, rather than having social and academic causes that I could think about. But this paranoia approach probably isn't great either, because it's just not true. Not everyone's cheating all the time. And it also kind of infects my own, I guess, attitude and stance toward the students, to the point where now I'm not being an effective friend and mentor to them in the teaching context. So I think this one is to be avoided too. How then, on this particular issue of ensuring academic integrity in our writing assignments, how can we go about this and do it in a way that's rational and reasonable in the face of these new AI threats or tools, however you want to see them? Here's one solution. I think it's a simple one, and it's a little bit labor intensive, might force you to go back and redo some of your curriculum, but hey, that's not always a bad thing, right? Rewrite your essay prompts and your assignments so that they just aren't so generic. If you're asking students to read something and like, tell me about a major theme that you see in this popular piece of literature, say for example, that is really susceptible to getting eaten alive by ChatGPT, right? It's going to give more or less reasonable, good sounding answers to something like that. Very general sorts of prompts. And this would also apply, by the way, for math and for science type things, for which the AI models also have a lot of knowledge and very good responses in some cases. So how could you do this? What could you do? Well, two things. One, you could ask students, along with some of your more generic writing assignments, to integrate their own personal experiences into their response. Can you ask an AI model to also fake personal experiences and put those into the responses? Yes, but I think once you start to do things like this, you put more skin in the game, so to speak, for the student. And there's a more personalized touch that draws the student into the assignment and makes faking personal experiences through an AI chatbot a weirder and maybe slightly harder thing to do. Another thing you can do is ask students to integrate citations and specific engagement with a particular reading that you have assigned, especially if that reading is really, really recent, like even within the last couple of months. So say, for example, you have assigned a particular kind of science paper, any field of science, and it's a pretty open question, and you're like, oh, I don't know, this feels like it's really open to just this kind of academic dishonesty. How do I treat this? You could ask the student, say it was a 3-page paper, you could ask them, instead of writing the whole 3 pages just about giving you back facts and so on to show that you understand, ask them to write 2 pages of those kinds of facts. Yes, still susceptible to the dishonesty, but on the 3rd page, you could actually ask them to integrate what they have learned and what they're telling you with a new article from some science-oriented popular publication, something that has just come out on the topic. The AI materials, as far as I know right now, are not very good at integrating really recent things from the internet. They don't really have access to that in many cases. And so if you ask students to do that, that's something that they really are going to probably have to do on their own, more or less. Again, are there kind of hacks and workarounds that students might pursue? Yes, but I think the goal here, again, avoiding those extremes I mentioned earlier, is to put forth a good faith effort at making your assignments the kind of things that students will engage with, rather than not cutting off every instance of cheating in every instance for all time, which is what I've tried to do in the past as a professor, and I think is just kind of a losing strategy. Here's another thing that I think we need to do. Again, it's labor intensive, but it's worth it, which is you get a baseline for each student about what their writing looks like when you know it is authentic, and you can then use that throughout the academic term you're in to measure the assignments that you're getting, especially if you're suspicious. So for example, you could early on in a class, as a strategy, have students do a lot of writing in person, on the spot, handwriting in the class if you're in an in-person environment, and begin to collect that as a kind of body of knowledge. And students don't always handwrite the way that they type things when they think, granted, but you can often get a really quick and pretty accurate snapshot of a student's thinking process, the kind of phrases they might use, and the way they write from that. And then you can use that as a baseline to judge the sorts of things that you're getting. You can then maybe flag things that you see as suspicious on that basis, rather than trying to use detection tools that might be faulty in too many cases. Speaking of a baseline, you can also, and this would go with the previous suggestion too about making your assignments less generic, you can take your own assignments, your own essay prompts, your own exam questions, and basically test them out on the AI systems, and not just on one. Use a couple. I know it takes a minute, but it might be worth it for you if you want to really guarantee that academic integrity in your classroom. Run your own questions through there. Find out the kinds of patterns of responses that these machines tend to give for your answers. And I think in doing that, you might learn a lot about how the question might be perceived even by students, but you can really learn a lot, I think, about how these types of machines, the AI, will answer your question. You might not then be able to detect exact phrases in response in student papers, but you'll have a better sense of the kinds of ways your questions would be answered if they were just copied and pasted directly from an AI tool. For example, one thing some of my colleagues have noticed when they have discovered academic dishonesty using AI is they've noticed that the responses that they'll get, say for an exam essay question, don't quite match what the question is. Not exactly. They're a little bit off in a particular way, or more telling, the answers are kind of like maybe like a grade level or two above the level of the class, and also include information that was never part of the assignments or the teaching. And by running their own questions through the AI beforehand, my colleagues had found that in fact, the AIs tended to give information like this, and therefore they were on alert for it when they started to read the student responses. That then becomes the basis for the conversation with the student about the academic integrity or dishonesty, not the checker tool. And maybe you use the checker tool and that makes you suspicious too. You just don't use that as the formal basis for your engagement with the student on the problem. You use some of this other stuff. And it can lead to a much more difficult conversation for the student if the student has been dishonest. I've also been shocked when talking with colleagues who have dealt with this kind of stuff about how open students are when confronted about using the AI tools, which can tell you one of two things. One is that when they're kind of caught, they just know they're caught. And it's like, now that leads to an honest conversation. The other thing that's been really fascinating, though, is that sometimes students just don't really think of this as cheating. And what's maybe even more problematic, where we have to look inside our own hearts as instructors, is that we haven't been clear about what our standards are to students about the use of AI, which is a great reminder that we need to be clear about our values around academic integrity to our students. They won't just guess what our values are. We need to tell them and be very explicit about that. Those are my main suggestions, and I think for people to pursue that path, I think you're going to get better results by making your writing prompts less generic, by incorporating citation of recent sources, by incorporating personal experiences from students into assignments and exams, but also by running your own questions through the machines yourself to see the kinds of things you get. I think you're going to be in a much more confident and stronger place as an instructor to address this kind of stuff. Even so, though, I have 5 more ideas I want to offer you real quick. 1, yes, instructors can think about moving more to in-class writing assignments, where it's like, get out the blue book, get out the paper, write your exam, write an essay, do writing right there in person. Obviously, much harder to pull up the AI on the side and do that when you're writing in person. You do have to know, though, when you grade that stuff, you're going to get a different level of response than you get when it's more thought out. And so, you have to adjust your expectations according to that. Number 2, yes, instructors can move more toward oral exams, asking people in person or in small groups to respond in person. I mean, oral examination has been a key part of many educational systems around the world at all levels. It's totally appropriate. You do want to do some research, though, before you engage in that about how to effectively administer an oral exam in person, because the standards and the method might be a little different. You are going to get students who are very nervous in that format, and you don't want to use someone's anxiety against them in a situation like that. So we'll put some resources down below you might check out if you want to think about moving to more oral exams. Number 3, you might even consider flipping the script entirely and requiring students to use AI on a writing assignment by way of using a writing scaffolding approach. We have another video, which we'll link here below, on the writing scaffolding approach, and you can kind of see how that would work. But quick summary, basically you ask the student to use something like ChatGPT to generate questions, to generate an outline, and even to write entire drafts of a paper, all while also asking the student to turn that generated material from the AI, and also write their own in response to it or in dialogue with it. And now you just cut the legs off of that whole process of the sneaking and the cheating, and you're just bringing it all out in the open, and you're saying, no, let's use this to really do a writing process and learn how to think together with the AI as a tool. Number 4, this is a popular one too, and goes along with the suggestions about oral exams and writing in class. Use a flipped classroom approach. We'll put some resources down below about what a flipped classroom is, but we could think of it like this. In a traditional classroom, I'm the instructor, and I give lectures the whole class period. Lecture, 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 think this, da 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 da, maybe a little Q&A in the last 2 minutes, then see you later, right? And then I would send students off to do exercises, work in groups, do writing, etc., off on their own. They hand that in, they come back, rinse and repeat. In a flipped classroom, I might offer them lecture materials from me in some recorded form, either in video form, as a podcast, in some other way. And then in person, we actually do that guided work of the class, the exercises or whatever it is. So when I taught a language class recently, for example, rather than lecturing students on the grammar, I recorded myself walking them through the textbook, had them listen to that and do that. And then when we came in together, we actually did the exercises together. So we did the homework in class and we did the lecture outside of class. That's a flipped classroom. And by doing stuff like that, you move more writing into the classroom. And now we disincentivize this idea of, oh no, I have to cheat and make the homework right outside of class so that I get an A and that kind of thing, because it's not like that. Finally, number 5, on a bigger level, I think there's good research that has shown us that cheating from students occurs for a huge number of reasons. We'll put some resources down below here in the video so you can check out the research that's being done on student academic dishonesty. It's not just one reason. It could be a competitive culture in your particular academic environment. It can also be the way that we ourselves do our assignments or our exams. And let me give one final example. By weighting a final exam or a particular essay too much, making it like 90% of the grade, we incentivize cheating actually, because now we've created a situation for students where it seems just like too big of a problem for them not to do well on that one thing. And there's really good research out there that shows that lower stakes assignments, still measuring the same things, still including the same amount of work, still getting the same results that you want as an instructor, but on lower stakes checks, actually disincentivizes cheating and helps you engage with the student more in a thinking and learning process. So maybe consider the way that you've weighted your assignments too, and you might see some of those incentives for academic dishonesty go down in the process. We don't have a magic bullet solution for AI academic dishonesty, for cheating. We don't have it yet, and something tells me we're not going to have it anytime soon, but I think some of the things I've suggested here can take you toward a place of confidence rather than gravitating toward extremes or feeling out of control on this issue. Hope it helps. Let us know in the comments what you think.